Welcome to Empathy Stories, where we uncover tales of resilience, transformation, and the pursuit of truth. Today, we dive into the extraordinary journey of a billionaire CEO who went undercover as an intern in her own company, only to expose a culture of toxicity and rebuild trust from the ground up. What she discovered will leave you inspired. The conference room at Pinnacle Dynamics glowed under the soft morning sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. From her seat at the head of the sleek mahogany table, Charlotte Davis, the company's CEO, stared at the illuminated cityscape of Seattle beyond the glass. The pristine office building symbolized the heights she had achieved as a tech entrepreneur, a company she had built from the ground up into one of the leading innovators in artificial intelligence. Yet, this morning, the glimmering skyline brought her no comfort. On her laptop screen were dozens of employee reviews and internal reports, their words sharper than any glare from the sun. Complaints of overwork, mismanagement, and toxic leadership filled the screen. Fear-driven culture, one read. Managers treat us like machines, said another. The words burned in her mind. Charlotte prided herself on creating an inclusive, forward-thinking company, but somewhere along the way, something had gone horribly wrong. The discontent wasn't visible during the board meetings or the carefully curated presentations from senior leaders like Mark Reed, the head of marketing, or James Walker, the CFO. Charlotte had built Pinnacle Dynamics to foster collaboration and innovation. Yet the foundation now seemed riddled with cracks. A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Her assistant entered, placing a stack of papers on the table. The agenda for this afternoon's leadership review, the assistant said with a polite smile before exiting. Charlotte barely acknowledged it. Her mind had already spiraled into a plan, radical, perhaps, but necessary. She had to know the truth, not filtered through reports or secondhand accounts, but firsthand. The next morning, Lily Carson, a new marketing intern, arrived at Pinnacle Dynamics. Lily wasn't a real person, of course, just an alias. Charlotte had traded her designer suits for a pair of jeans, sneakers, and a plain blouse. Her hair was pulled into a simple ponytail, and her makeup was minimal. For the first time in years, Charlotte stepped through her own office doors unnoticed. The HR onboarding process was brisk, but impersonal. Charlotte marveled at the irony. This was her company, yet no one seemed interested in the people walking in. Her assigned cubicle was at the far corner of the marketing floor, a tight space barely big enough for her chair and monitor. The area buzzed with muted conversations and the faint clicking of keyboards. Her immediate supervisor, Mark Reed, was quick to make his presence known. Tall and sharp-suited, Mark radiated authority. His voice carried an edge of disdain as he addressed the team during the morning briefing. "Numbers are down this quarter," he barked. "Do better. I don't have time for excuses." Charlotte kept her head down, pretending to take notes. She noticed the way her colleagues flinched when Mark walked past. His gaze lingered too long on certain employees, his critiques always loud enough for everyone to hear. He seemed to thrive on intimidation. "Lily, right?" Mark said, stopping abruptly at her desk. "Your assignment's in your inbox. You have 2 hours." Charlotte nodded, murmuring a polite, "Yes, sir." She opened the email and frowned. It was an impossible task, an analysis requiring data she didn't even have access to. She glanced at the intern beside her, a young man named Ryan Lee, whose panicked expression mirrored her own. "Is it always like this?" Charlotte whispered. Ryan hesitated, his eyes darting toward Mark's office. "Worse," he muttered. "Just wait until he has a bad day." Over the next week, Charlotte became familiar with the unspoken rules of the marketing floor. Keep your head down, don't challenge Mark, and above all, never show weakness. But amidst the fear and tension, Charlotte discovered pockets of resilience. Emily Carter, a mid-level project manager, was one such figure, a single mother juggling late-night deadlines with her son's school commitments. Emily was a force of quiet strength, despite the lack of recognition from higher-ups. She often stayed late, reviewing team reports and fixing errors that could have cost the company valuable contracts. Then there was Michael Rivera, the tech team's unsung hero. He worked tirelessly behind the scenes to keep the company's systems running smoothly. Whenever servers crashed or reports vanished into the ether, Michael was there, restoring order with little fanfare. Yet, his contributions seemed invisible to management. Charlotte often overheard him muttering to himself, "Just part of the job," as he fixed yet another problem without a word of thanks. Charlotte's respect for them grew, but so did her frustration. How could such dedication go unnoticed? One evening, Charlotte stayed late to finish an overdue task. The office was nearly empty, save for a few lingering employees. She noticed Emily at her desk, typing furiously while occasionally glancing at her phone. Across the room, Michael was tinkering with a server panel, his expression weary but determined. The sound of voices drew Charlotte's attention to a nearby conference room. Mark and James were in a heated discussion, their tones low but sharp. Charlotte stepped closer, careful to remain out of sight. "These interns are dead weight," Mark said. "I'm pushing them harder. If they break, we replace them. Simple." "And what about Sarah?" Emily?" James replied. "She's been stirring the pot, complaining about workload. Emily's replaceable." Mark snapped. "Everyone here is. They need to remember that." Charlotte's stomach churned. These were her employees, her people, and this was how they were being treated? As disposable? She had always believed that leadership meant building others up. But here were her top executives tearing them down. The next day, Charlotte returned to her cubicle with a new sense of determination. She began taking detailed notes, documenting every interaction, every careless remark. Slowly, she earned the trust of her colleagues. Emily confided in her during a coffee break. "It's exhausting," she admitted. "I'm proud of my work, but it feels like no one cares. I've been passed over for promotions 3 times now." Michael was more reserved but equally disillusioned. "I love what I do," he said one evening, "but it's hard to stay motivated when you're treated like a ghost." Even Ryan, the intern, opened up. "I thought this was my dream job," he said, "but now, I don't know. I'm just trying to survive until my contract ends." Their stories weighed heavily on Charlotte. These were the people who kept Pinnacle Dynamics alive, the ones who worked late nights, fixed problems before they escalated, and carried the weight of unrealistic expectations. Yet, they were being dismissed, ignored, and undervalued. Charlotte knew she couldn't let this continue. But to dismantle the toxic culture, she needed irrefutable proof. And so, she continued to observe, document, and bide her time, waiting for the moment to reveal the truth. The days at Pinnacle Dynamics stretched into weeks, and Charlotte's resolve only deepened as she uncovered more cracks in the company's culture. From her vantage point as Lily Carson, the intern, she saw firsthand the toll that toxic management had taken on her employees. Each day brought a new revelation, a fresh example of just how far the company had strayed from its values. One rainy evening, Charlotte stayed late, determined to finish a report Mark had assigned, a task so convoluted it seemed designed to set her up for failure. As she worked in the dimly lit office, she overheard voices drifting from Mark's glass-walled office. She crept closer, careful to stay out of sight. Inside, Mark was seated across from James Walker, the CFO. Their conversation was low and confidential, but Charlotte could hear the condescension in their tones. "Listen, James," Mark began, leaning back in his chair. "We're wasting resources on people who don't deliver. Take Emily Carter, for example. She's always staying late, fixing other people's mistakes. But where's the ROI on that? She's expendable." James chuckled. "It's not about the work, Mark. It's about control. Keep people scrambling, and they won't have time to question us. Sarah, Emily, thinks she's indispensable, but she's just a cog in the machine. If she can't handle the pressure, we'll push her out." Charlotte's hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just poor management. It was a deliberate strategy to manipulate and discard employees who didn't conform to their brutal expectations. Emily wasn't just a hardworking single mother. She was a target. The next name on their list stopped Charlotte cold. "Ryan Lee," Mark said, smirking. "That kid's barely holding on. One more push, and he'll crack. And when he does, we won't even need to replace him. His workload can be split among the others. The casual cruelty of their words hit Charlotte like a punch. These weren't leaders, they were predators. The following day, Charlotte approached Emily during their lunch break, her voice low and careful. "Do you ever feel like management is targeting you?" she asked, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. Emily hesitated, her expression guarded. "What makes you say that?" "I overheard Mark and James talking about you last night," Charlotte admitted. "They see you as a threat, and they're trying to drive you out." Emily's eyes widened. "I knew it," she whispered. "They've been piling on extra work, ignoring my requests for help, but I can't afford to lose this job. Lily, I have a son to think about. We're not alone in this," Charlotte assured her. "Michael feels the same way. And Ryan, he's struggling more than he lets on. We need to stick together." Over the next few days, Charlotte quietly rallied her colleagues. She shared her observations, encouraging them to document their own experiences. The group began to meet in secret, late-night coffee runs, whispered conversations in the stairwell, slowly building a case against the toxic practices at Pinnacle Dynamics. It wasn't long before Mark's temper reached a boiling point. During a team meeting, one of the junior employees dared to suggest an alternative strategy for an ad campaign. Mark's response was swift and vicious. "Do you think I have time to entertain amateur ideas?" he snapped, his voice rising. "You're here to do as you're told, not to play creative director." The room fell silent. The employee, visibly shaken, muttered an apology and sank into their chair. But Charlotte couldn't let it slide. "With all due respect, Mark," she said, her voice steady despite the tension, "isn't fostering creativity part of the team's mission? If we shut people down like this, we lose out on innovation." Mark's glare could have cut through steel. "Stay in your lane." "Intern," he growled. "You don't know what you're talking about." The exchange left the room on edge, but it also sparked something in Charlotte's colleagues. Later that day, Emily approached her, a determined glint in her eye. "We're with you, Lily. Whatever you're planning, we'll help." Charlotte's moment of truth came unexpectedly. One evening, while finalizing her documentation, she stumbled upon an internal email thread buried in the shared company drive. The messages were between Mark, James, and other senior managers, discussing strategies for cutting costs. Their proposals included outsourcing critical roles, slashing benefits, and laying off long-tenured employees, all under the guise of streamlining operations. Worse still, the emails revealed a plan to falsify performance reviews, labeling key employees as underperformers to justify their termination. Emily's name was on the list. So was Michael's. The evidence was damning. Charlotte downloaded the files and forwarded them to a secure account. It was time to act. The following morning, Charlotte walked into the office with a new sense of purpose. She sent an email to the entire company, inviting them to a special announcement in the main conference room. Within an hour, the room was packed: junior staff, mid-level employees, even a few senior managers. Charlotte stepped to the front of the room, her appearance still that of Lily Carson. But as she began to speak, her true identity became clear. "My name is Charlotte Davis," she announced, her voice firm. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "For the past few months, I've been working undercover as an intern to understand what's happening in this company. And what I've discovered is unacceptable." She clicked a button on her laptop, and the projector screen lit up with the damning emails. "This is what your leadership has been planning behind closed doors. They've called you disposable. They've targeted you, manipulated you, and dismissed your value." The crowd murmured, anger and disbelief spreading like wildfire. Mark and James, seated near the back, looked pale and furious. Charlotte turned to them. "Mark Reed, James Walker, your time here is over. Effective immediately. You are no longer employees of Pinnacle Dynamics." Security personnel entered the room, escorting the stunned men out. The crowd erupted into applause. Charlotte's revelation sparked a wave of change throughout the company. Employees began sharing their stories, stepping out of the shadows now that the fear was gone. Charlotte reinstated transparency policies, introduced mentorship programs, and created a task force to rebuild the company's culture. But the battle wasn't over. Mark and James weren't going down quietly, and their retaliation would test Charlotte's resolve in ways she hadn't anticipated. The days following Charlotte's bold reveal were a whirlwind. Pinnacle Dynamics was no longer a company shrouded in secrecy and fear. It was a company in turmoil. The immediate dismissal of Mark Reed and James Walker sent shockwaves through the organization. For the first time, employees felt that their voices had power. But with the newfound hope came resistance from the remnants of the old guard. And Charlotte knew that her battle was far from over. Mark and James wasted no time launching a counterattack. Within a week, Charlotte received notice of a lawsuit alleging wrongful termination and defamation. Their claims were bolstered by a small but vocal group of senior managers who had benefited from the toxic culture. The media caught wind of the story, and soon, headlines painted a picture of a rogue CEO ousting her team in a fit of vengeance. Charlotte sat in her office, the weight of the legal documents pressing down on her. The company she had built, the people she cared about, and her own reputation were all on the line. Her legal counsel, Mary Ann Coleman, was confident they could win the case, but it would be a long and costly fight. It's not just about the lawsuit, Mary Ann said during one late-night strategy session. They're trying to fracture the trust you've rebuilt with your employees. If they succeed, it'll take years to recover. Charlotte nodded. Then we can't just defend. We have to go on the offensive. We need to show the world the truth. Charlotte turned to the employees who had stood by her during the fallout. Emily Carter, Michael Rivera, and Ryan Lee were at the forefront of this effort. Together, they organized a series of town hall meetings, inviting employees at all levels to share their experiences. These meetings became a platform for transparency and healing, and the stories shared were both heartbreaking and inspiring. Emily spoke about the sleepless nights spent juggling work and motherhood, and how the fear of losing her job had weighed on her like a stone. Michael recounted the countless times his contributions were dismissed. And Ryan, with surprising courage, detailed the anxiety and self-doubt he had endured as an intern under Mark's oppressive management. Their stories became the backbone of Charlotte's defense, both in the courtroom and the court of public opinion. Employees rallied around their CEO, signing petitions and writing open letters of support. The tide began to turn, and the once negative headlines shifted focus to the bravery of the employees who had spoken out. As the legal battle raged on, Charlotte focused on rebuilding Pinnacle Dynamics from the ground up. She implemented a zero-tolerance policy for harassment and intimidation and established a leadership development program to promote transparency and empathy among managers. One of the most significant changes was the creation of an employee advisory council, with representatives from every department. Emily, Michael, and Ryan were among the first members, ensuring that the voices of the workforce were heard at the highest levels of decision-making. Charlotte also restructured the company's performance review process, emphasizing collaboration and personal growth over rigid metrics. Employees were encouraged to set goals that aligned with their passions, and mentorship programs flourished under the new system. The changes weren't easy. Some employees struggled to adapt to the new culture, and there were moments of resistance even among those who supported Charlotte. But over time, the atmosphere began to shift. The fear that had once permeated every corner of the office was replaced with a sense of possibility. Months passed, and the day of the court's decision finally arrived. The trial had been grueling, with Mark and James painting a picture of themselves as scapegoats for a CEO's reckless ambitions. But Charlotte's legal team, bolstered by testimonies from employees and the damning evidence she had uncovered, presented a compelling case. As the judge read the verdict, the room fell silent. Mark and James were found guilty of fostering a toxic workplace environment and engaging in unethical practices. Their lawsuit was dismissed, and they were ordered to pay restitution to Pinnacle Dynamics. Charlotte felt a wave of relief as the decision sank in. Justice had been served, not just for her, but for everyone who had suffered under the old regime. The company could finally move forward. With the legal battle behind them, Pinnacle Dynamics entered a new era. The changes Charlotte had implemented began to bear fruit, and the company's reputation as an innovator was soon matched by its reputation as a leader in employee well-being. Revenue climbed steadily, and job applications poured in from top talent across the industry. Emily was promoted to Director of Operations, a role that allowed her to champion the voices of employees across the organization. Michael became the head of IT, transforming his department into a model of collaboration and efficiency. Ryan, now a full-time employee, worked alongside Charlotte on a new initiative to mentor young professionals entering the workforce. One evening, as Charlotte walked through the office, she paused to take in the scene around her. The once quiet halls were now filled with laughter and conversation. Teams collaborated openly, and the sense of camaraderie was palpable. It was the company she had always envisioned, a place where people thrived, not just professionally, but personally. Emily approached her, holding a steaming cup of coffee. "You did it, Charlotte," she said with a smile. "We all did." Charlotte nodded, her heart swelling with pride. "This is just the beginning," she said. "There's still so much more we can do." Pinnacle Dynamics became a beacon of hope in the corporate world, proving that success didn't have to come at the expense of humanity. Charlotte's journey was chronicled in business journals and case studies. But for her, the real victory was the trust and respect of her employees. Years later, as Charlotte prepared to step down as CEO, she reflected on the lessons she had learned. Leadership wasn't about power or control. It was about empowering others. It was about building something that would last far beyond her tenure. As she handed the reins to Emily, now the first female CEO in the company's history, Charlotte felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Pinnacle Dynamics was no longer her company. It was theirs, and she knew it was in good hands. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of courage and leadership. Charlotte's story shows that real change begins with empathy and a willingness to confront hard truths. If this story inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe to Empathy Stories for more empowering narratives. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments and know where you're watching from. Remember, transformation is possible when we lead with compassion and determination. Until next time, stay kind and keep striving for better.